Greetings from Costa Rica. I hope you're doing well. My name is Matt Rosensteel. I live here in Playa Junquillal, just 30 minutes south of Playa Tamarindo. Today, in my installment of Costa Rica FAQ, I'm going to be covering the question, selling your property here in Costa Rica. Previously, I think in edition number 8, I had done questions related to buying property here. And I wanted to flip things around and look at things from the perspective of sellers today. For those of you who have owned property here and decided that it's time to move on and do other things, please feel free to send me any questions, comments, or concerns about what you hear in this edition of Costa Rica FAQ. You can email me at matt@cbtamarindo.com. I'm a member of the Coldwell Banker Tamarindo Realty team. You can also come see me on Fridays in the Coldwell Banker Tamarindo office, and you're in that area, or you can come find me here in Playa Junquillal most other days of the week. As a general disclaimer always, this is not legal advice and everything should be verified with your attorney when you're considering selling your property. Definitely I'm open to all kinds of opinions and perspectives. The information that I share is based on 11 years working here in Guanacaste, the northwestern part of Costa Rica. And definitely if there's anything true about real estate in Costa Rica, it's that there's not an absolute answer to every question 100% of the time. So again, this will be based on my experience here in Guanacaste. We've got 5 total topics to discuss today. First of all, we're going to hit the process of preparing your property for sale, and specifically I'm going to make some recommendations about how you can do this without spending a fortune. Essentially give a bunch of tips, ideas for what I think can be most easily done to get your house very attractive or your lot, etc. For potential buyers without spending too much money. Second of all, I'll discuss appraising its market value and give some general thoughts about how you go about that here in Guanacaste. I'll cover the legal documents you need to have in order so that you're prepared to sell your property. I've had lots of clients arrive at the moment where someone is interested in buying and realize that they might not have a document that's being requested for due diligence. Next, we'll discuss exclusive versus open listing agreements here in Costa Rica. And finally, I'll go over the cost of selling so that you have an idea of what exactly all of the different line items are going to be when you go to actually complete the transaction. Again, my name is Matt Rosensteel. If you're watching on Facebook, please give us a like for the Latitude 10 page. If you're watching me on YouTube, please subscribe and leave any comments and questions you might have. Without further ado, we'll just get right into the meat of the discussion today. First, in preparing your property for sale, I think that one of the most important things to understand is that, in my opinion, every dollar that you invest before listing the property to make your home, your lot, your condo, whatever it is you're selling, more presentable, more fresh, and welcoming for visitors is a dollar well spent. Really some very minor adjustments that you can make before any potential buyers see the property can be done so that you're going to have a better impact when that door opens the first time or when they pull up to the property. And a lot of these things that you can do aren't going to cost a lot of money. But having shown properties now countless times, these are things that I see that can immediately improve the impact you are going to have with your potential clients. First, and these are in order of both, I think, the highest priorities and the least investment you have to put in, light bulbs and paint are your absolute allies. And when I say light bulbs, I mean it is absolutely the best thing you can do to have tons of light in every room of your house or condo if that's what you're listing. Really, you maybe don't understand the difference between opening the door to your normal warm sort of home that you're accustomed to versus what potential buyers are seeing. And most often when we open the door and see especially light bulbs that are different colors, maybe there are LED lights in part of the house and more traditional bulbs in other parts, really it can create this instantaneous back of the mind impression that things aren't exactly totally fresh, welcoming, and it can start to lead the client towards that sense of, oh, this isn't really a great, up to turnkey condition property. So really, I tell all of my clients, I beg, make sure as much as you can that every fixture in your condo or home has the same kind of light bulb and that it's as bright as possible. So that when we open the door, rather than getting a gloomier, dark feeling, it's bright and as fresh as possible. And second of all, paint. That might be a very obvious suggestion, but because painters can be a lower cost service here in Costa Rica than in the US, Canada, or Europe, for example, have someone paint, touch up, and do everything possible to make sure that the walls, inside, outside, your fascia, different places around your property look just fresh and clean with a new coat of paint. It's a minimal investment up front. You can paint an entire house here for a few $1,000s, even large homes. So really do think about doing that before you list your property, because that few $1,000s up front on painting might help you snag a client at $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 higher closing price simply because they felt better that the house was fresher and in more turnkey condition when they first saw it. Second of all, another obvious one, pressure washing here in Costa Rica, or rather the second tier here, things that are a little bit more involved, but that I still think are very cost effective. Pressure washing all of your concrete surfaces around the house, anything that can be cleaned since mold has built up there over years. Sanding and treating wood, properties here that take into account those wonderful Costa Rican wood elements. If you're able to sand and varnish any wood that's exposed on your house or in the condo, you'd be amazed at how much brighter and more interesting, beautiful that can make things look for very little money. And finally, refreshing the landscaping. Really trying to see if, perhaps an unattractive corner of your property, there's an exposed air conditioning unit or some rust stains on a wall or just an area that never looks very good. Cover it up with some potted plants or put a palm there, add some bamboo, do whatever you can through simple landscaping ideas to really refresh what's going on outside and make it look orderly. The other day I was at a property with a great client, and one of the biggest improvements they're going to be able to do is cover an area of their outside patio in white stone that'll immediately transform a corner of their yard that currently is looks old and worn out and sort of like a place on the property you wouldn't want to go, into something that's at least fresh and clean and not eye-catching for potential buyers. Third, and I think what represents the most investment of the items I think that are the most urgent priorities, but still something that's pretty easy to do, look at changing out your linens and your window treatments. It's unbelievable the difference that you can make in a room if, for example, you have old, rundown window treatments and you replace those with blinds, even if they're not going to last 10 years or the absolute highest quality product. Quickly, you can really make a space that feels somewhat old and worn out jump way up in a potential client's mind if you change out those old curtains for new ones. And then in your bedrooms, if you have new linens versus your old bedspreads, everybody gets comfortable with your sheets and down comforter, whatever you use. But over time, those don't look attractive to somebody who's coming into a place for the first time. And the return on investment you can get by switching out those linens, getting new ones so that your bedrooms look organized, clean, very presentable. Same thing in the bathrooms, really nice towels, hand towels, washcloths, etc. It really elevates the way a bathroom feels, even though you really haven't changed anything significant about the actual bathroom or the actual bedroom. It's a way that you can invest a small amount of money and have buyers walk in and say, this looks nice and fresh and welcoming. So again, all of these are what I would say are just a jot list of your priorities. If you're about to sell your property and want to invest up front to make the best impression on buyers, here's what I would do. And I would definitely try to do everything on this list at a minimum, because again, everything you do before they start showing up is going to help you snag that potential buyer and turn them into someone who's interested and actually wants to really make an offer or get serious about your property. Next, let's move on to the question of appraising the market value of your property. If you've listened to any of my casts before, you know that appraising anything here in Guanacaste is a much trickier and more difficult enterprise than it might be in the US, Canada, or Europe. First of all, because currently our real estate market does not have one centralized database of all of the listing information, of all of the sale and transaction information. Costa Rica does have a national registry with all of the property titles. That information is available, and now you can see exactly how much people are buying for, assuming they're being honest on their transfer deed. But that sort of information is available if you know the number of the property you're looking for, and really on an individual piece-by-piece basis. Really, for any kind of appraisal, you're going to be relying primarily on the knowledge your broker brings to the table, their experience in the area, and the amount of research that they've personally done to keep up with what has closed recently, the comps, the success of other listings, etc., so that they can really give you an idea of what's going on. So to point number one, yes, here there is a dire lack of comp information compared to some of the more mature real estate markets in the world, not only because there isn't a centralized database for every single transaction yet, but also because there simply isn't much real estate that's comparable one thing to the next. Whereas if we were trying to figure out how much the square foot of a Brooklyn condo is worth, we would have thousands of condos with which to compare it that are in similar neighborhoods, that have similar construction dates, on and on. Really, the number of comps truly that you're going to find is going to be minimal for any piece of land, home, or condo that you're trying to sell. For example, when I've got a listing client who's interested in selling a property, one of the things that I have to do is really dig back into my files, look through the listings that I had saved myself to send to clients, rack my brain through the sales that I know, and also leverage the knowledge of my team at Coldwell Banker, ping people, reach out to them and ask, what has recently closed, what was that comp price, etc. And I usually try to come up with at least half a dozen to 10 properties that have some insight to shed on the listing price for a potential new listing. For example, in Tamarindo, a relatively mature market here in Costa Rica, if you're looking to list a 3 or 4 bedroom house, there simply aren't that many currently on the market. The ones that are listed, when they do close, may close at a price that's much different than their asking price, because here there's more fluctuation than you would see in other markets. And sometimes, if people are acquiring through a transfer of shares, or if people are trying to handle the transaction in a way that minimizes tax obligations, that real price cannot be recorded. So anyhow, it can be very difficult to put together that research and really come up with a huge amount of comp information. But in exploring a potential listing with your broker, it's something they should be able to do, and something that if you're interested in selling your property, I would say one of your first steps is to knock on as many doors as possible to see what has happened recently and start gathering that knowledge yourself to get an idea of what's happening in the market, because there is no easy solution to compiling market data that's going to give you the exact value of your property. What we end up doing in most cases to try and put a listing price on a property when I'm working with clients is really a combination of these two components. First, the replacement cost of the property. In the market right now, if a buyer is looking at your home or buying a lot and building themselves, what would it cost otherwise? That is very important here in Guanacaste because land values shift so much over time. We had that huge explosion of interest and development leading up to the financial crisis in 2008. Land values at that time were doubling every year, doing crazy things. They then took a big plunge, and so when you're trying to evaluate a reasonable sale price, especially for your home or piece of land, you really have to look at where are the land values now and where are land parcels actually selling in the market today. You might think, well, we meet a lot of clients who had purchased in that frenzy leading up to 2008, and unfortunately many had purchased at the absolute peak price when the speculation was at its greatest. They feel, well, I have an ocean view lot. The ocean view lots, when I was buying them, were worth, X $100 per square meter, some enormous price. And they hope to do that, but realistically, or they hope to earn that through their sale. But realistically, if they look at what's on the market today and where land is actually closing, they might see that, wow, the price in this area shifted a huge amount. Especially, for example, if you invested in a project where infrastructure was, supposed to be paved roads and maybe they never did that, or they had one plan and developed another, you might see that now your expectation has to be really based on how could somebody replace this same product and move into a similar property in the market today. I then take that replacement cost analysis based on, for example, that land value plus the current construction cost, and it has to be compared with the urgency of the seller to actually liquidate the property. Really, Guanacaste in Costa Rica is a slower real estate market in absolute terms than most of the mature places that you find in the US and Canadian urban areas especially. The average listing period, even in active markets like Tamarindo or some of the bigger tourism hubs, that listing period can be 3 to 6 to 9 to 12 months, whereas in the more active places elsewhere, you see listings turning over in a week or 2 months or 3 months maximum. Really, things don't happen as quickly here as they do elsewhere in the world. And so, depending on what the seller wants to achieve financially and when, really setting the listing price and appraising the market value has to take into account that. If you want to sell a property that's in a quirky area, maybe up a dirt road on top of a mountain, quickly, you're going to have to pick a much, much different price than if you're willing to sit on it for 5-10 years or really wait until that buyer comes along who's going to see the value. Patience is absolutely a virtue in this area in that, yes, prices have been firming up ever since the crisis, or rather ever since the effects of the crisis really dropped prices. Sellers are gaining the advantage again. If you're selling in Tamarindo, Langosta, Reserva Conchal, Hacienda Penilla, really the market is swinging in your favor and that there's far more demand for those areas than there are available properties. However, if you're aiming to sell within 2 or 3 weeks, even in those areas, that's likely not possible unless you pick a very aggressive price. And furthermore, if you don't have property in one of those areas, if you're in somewhere located further from the beach with poorer access in a community, again, that maybe didn't have quite as much development, you're going to have to get proportionately more aggressive with your price, that is, lower it according to how quickly you hope to sell. Usually when I'm providing an appraisal to people in sort of a listing strategy, what I say is, here's where I think a fair closing price for your property would be on different timelines. If you're looking to sell within 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, here are the prices at which I think that's feasible and fair in the current market. And it's a graded scale, meaning that sellers, if you have up to 12 months to sell, or if you're willing to wait 2 years, let's list it at this higher price, try and get more value for your property, and really just patiently wait for a buyer that's going to want to invest in a valuable property. Moving on, let's talk about, and I went backwards accidentally, the legal documents needed in order to be ready to sell when that moment comes. Really, it's not too complicated, and I'm just going to hit the key items. If you're selling a multi-million-dollar business, a hotel, obviously you're going to need a lot more than this basic list that I'm about to cover, which I would say applies to people with your average lot, home, or condo here in Guanacaste. First of all, if you own your property through a corporation, do everybody a favor and make sure that you know where your corporate books are. These are the 2 or 3 hardbound books or a binder with the documents of your corporation's founding charter. It's very important that you have these documents in hand, because when you go to sell your property, your attorney is going to have to draw up basically the minutes from a meeting, or rather the official documentation that your corporate shareholders met and approved the sale of the property. So you're going to have your corporate books to be able to sell when the time comes. And if you don't have them, you can end up in just a problematic situation delaying the sale, because it takes 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the response time of your attorney and some other factors, to renew or to recreate those books. So you don't want that month delay. When you finally have a buyer come and make an offer, you get close to you're in the due diligence process. They say, well, I need the corporate act showing that you guys approved the sale. You go out to pull out your corporate books. Oh my gosh, they were lost 10 years ago because you haven't used them since then. Make sure you have them on file, ready to go, and best in the hands of your attorney so that they're ready to make this document for your potential buyer's attorney. Second of all, 2 really common requests that the purchaser's attorney is going to make are going to be for your plano catastrado and the building permit if you have a single family residence, or even in the case of condominiums, but that is something that your condominium administrator would have to provide. Your plano catastrado is the titled land deed, the map showing your plot of land. Having an up-to-date copy is it's something that can be obtained from the registry, not without too much delay, but it's something that potential buyers will be asking to see during the listing, or anybody who gets interested might immediately ask to see that. And finally, through due diligence, when the buyer's attorney is requesting all of this documentation from your attorney or from you directly, if you've decided to not involve an attorney, they're going to want to see various tax documents and your receipts, essentially showing that your property is up to date on any bills that it would have. If you just have a plot of land, they're going to want to see that you paid your municipal taxes, or that you're close to paying them, and that you'll be able to cover them through closing easily. In the case of a condominium, they're going to want to see that your HOA fees are at least paid through closing, or that they will be paid through closing. Anything that might be pending against the lot, your home or condo, they're going to want to see proof that that's up to date, or that you have a reasonable plan, that it's not 10 years behind on taxes, or in some kind of trouble with the government because you haven't been paying one bill or another. These Three, I would say, make up the very core of what you need to really just be ready to list your property. There are, like I said, other requirements that an attorney could request as part of the due diligence process when you're selling, but really with these you should be in good shape to be prepared to answer questions and provide further information to interested clients. Now, to move on to exclusive versus open listing agreements here in Costa Rica, I think there's a lot of confusion in general about how real estate works and how different brokerages manage things. People all the time have a misconception about how our real estate market operates because, yes, there are people saying different things constantly, and so what I can give is an overview of the most common practices and what is actually possible. Most commonly I hear that, an exclusive agreement is going to limit me and I want to be able to work with anybody in the case to find a buyer. Really, that's the biggest misconception I confront in trying to approach potential sellers about listing their property. Through an exclusive listing agreement, you are hiring a professional simply to represent you. That just means that at closing, when the commission is assigned, no matter what, the seller's side commission, what you're paying as half the fee to sell your property, is going to go to this particular agent. Anybody can still bring the potential buyer to the table when you're working with an exclusive listing agreement. You're really only contracting someone to represent you. Now, I think the other part of that misconception is that frequently sellers think that, it's going to cost me more to sell my property if I enter into an exclusive agreement. We're going to cover the exact costs in just a second, but really it should not cost you 1 penny more to sell your property through an exclusive agreement versus a bunch of open agreements. And just to clarify, so in an exclusive agreement, you're hiring one person to represent you, guaranteeing them half of the commission at closing to represent your interests and to help you all the way through from listing the property through closing. Through open listing agreements, which you do see commonly used here in Costa Rica, sellers try to get as many different agents, brokers, brokerages to represent their property, or rather to bring potential buyers as possible. Now, what happens is the difference between entering into an exclusive agreement and these open agreements is that through an exclusive agreement, you have the accountability of somebody that you're hiring to represent you. Through open agreements, you really are just hoping that friends, contacts, other realtors will take an interest in marketing your listing and will try to bring prospective buyers. But when you call up an open listing broker on the weekend or at any time during the week, really, they don't have the accountability that an exclusive listing agent does. So to discuss the pros and cons briefly of exclusive versus open listing agreements, really, yes, there is the dynamic that some brokers, realtors in the area are more attracted to open listings and bringing buyers there because they can earn the full commission since there's no seller's agent involved, or that there wouldn't be if they're able to arrive at a contract. There is that attraction to some realtors and brokers, but the huge drawback to that aspect, I think, is that really that the type of person, the agents operating in this area that are operating at the highest level and providing the most professional service show their colleagues exclusive listings and open listings on an equal basis based on the needs of their clients. So truly, if you want to get the best people bringing their prospective buyers to your property, you should expect that those realtors and brokers in the area who have the highest impact are going to bring their clients, whether you have an open listing through which they might earn the full commission, or you have an exclusive listing and they're only going to earn half the commission. Really, it should be them looking out for their client's best interests, and if their client's best interests align with your property, the client should be seeing it regardless. So I see as the enormous pro of an exclusive listing agreement is that instead of trying to get people to buy into selling your property and help you out, you've got someone who is hired to do so, not only to be in charge of marketing the property, but also for 100% of that outreach process that you would otherwise have to do through open listing agreements. Your exclusive listing representative should be contacting other agents in the area saying, hey, I've got this listing, and really trying to figure out through their network, both professionally, internationally, everywhere that they're working, how they can best generate interest in your property and try and find buyers. And an enormous part of that process is reaching out to all of the brokers, people who collect commissions, etc., people who try to earn referrals in the area, just to make sure that your property is getting the maximum exposure to that network as possible. Through open listings, you're calling up single agents and saying, hey, I've got this property for sale, I hope you'll help me, and then trying to remind them and follow up down the line saying, hey, I never saw it on your website. Really, through an exclusive listing agreement, you're choosing someone that you can say, all right, I expect to see results 2 weeks from now, a month from now, 2 months from now, etc. I want to hear how my property is being marketed. I want to know which contacts have received the listing, on. And that person has to give you satisfactory answers, or you can take your exclusive listing somewhere else. So let's talk about those costs of selling finally. And really, I think one of the most important questions in deciding whether or not it's the right time to list is deciding whether it makes sense financially. Looking at here, again, this being a general list based on my experience here in Guanacaste and based on what is most commonly used here in this market. Also, commonly for the average home, lot, or condo, things would look different if we were talking about a multi-million-dollar enormous property, and vice versa. Things might look different if it were a very, very small investment, simply because some of these costs can change. Anyhow, the standard commission, which is almost always paid by the seller in this market, is 6%. That 6% is the total commission that you as a seller would pay to either your broker if they bring a buyer and are fully responsible for selling the property, or between your listing agent and the buyer's agent, a split situation where each is earning 3%. If those agents are doing business according to the law in Costa Rica, they have to collect 13% sales tax on their 6% commission, and that is an equivalent of 0.78% of the total sales price. And to go back and touch on a general note, all of these percentages are of the total sales price. So between the commission that you're paying and the tax, which the agents will charge on the same receipt that they charge their commission, right away you're at 6.78%. That is usually paid to either one or two brokerages, and most often you'll see that that is split up among the agents involved, their brokerage, etc. But 6.78% should be the absolute maximum. You might see situations, if you're trying to sell a very low-priced property, where brokers are unable to take the listing unless they're guaranteed a minimum commission. You might see situations where brokers offer that, okay, if I'm able to sell the property quickly, if I'm able to sell it to one of your contacts directly, if we're able to sell it before I even do the marketing, we might make an exception to that sales commission. That would be set up in a listing agreement in advance, but by far the standard that you're going to see is 6%. Second of all, third, you're looking at 2% projected closing costs. And here, it's important to say projected because this 2% is if you enter into a sales contract whereby you're splitting evenly the closing costs with the buyer. Closing costs, which I'm referring to as the public notary fees, transfer taxes, and stamps, which are another form of tax here in Costa Rica, are 4% of the total sales price. Now they're just a tiny bit above 4% because of the new tax law. But if you're in a common transaction, and what I most often see is that buyers and sellers offer to evenly split those 2 and 2. So as a seller, you should be looking at a 2% projected sales closing costs on top of your sales commission and that tax. Granted, you are going to hear from other brokerages who do things differently here. Many times you'll see people who do not want to fully split that 4%. They instead say, well, the public notary, which is 1.5% more or less of that 4 total, they'll say the buyer should cover that cost entirely themselves, since that public notary is going to represent the buyer's interests at closing. So it's logical, and you can see counteroffers or offers made that way. I'm putting 2% here because as a seller, that's usually about the maximum you should be thinking about. If you want to counter with, well, the buyer has to pay that full public notary fee themselves, then you'd be looking at something more like 1.25 to 1.5 for the remaining split, the 50% of the transfer taxes and stamps. Next, assuming right now you're selling in 2019, 20, 21, if you have a significant increase in the value of your property that's going to happen in the registry, it's likely that you're going to be on the hook for a 2.25% capital gains tax. You can learn more about that in my previous video back from this July when the law was passed. But essentially, planning on paying this tax, I'm just putting here to really put the maximum numbers on the table that you might be expecting to pay. This tax, I think, affects a lot of owners because many people invested 3, 5, 10 years ago when it was advantageous to represent on paper that you were purchasing for less than the actual value, or that for one reason or another, the current registered value of your property is far below what you're going to sell it for. Because of this capital gains tax, the Costa Rican government now is either going to charge you 15% of the difference between that original price that you put when you purchased and the sale price now that you sell, which if you adjusted the value previously, or if you have a low value, if the price of your construction is not included in the National Registry, that could be enormous. The second alternative, instead of 15% of that difference, is a 2.25% on the total value of the property at the time of sale. So 2.25% of your sales price. In total, if that capital gains tax applies to you, if you split evenly your closing costs with the buyers, and assuming you're paying the standard commission plus tax on the sale, you're looking at a total of 11.03% to sell your property as the absolute majority, the meat and bones of your closing costs. Now granted, these closing your cost to sell the property, not just your closing costs, but 11.03 to sell your home, condo, or lot. Now, granted, what was I going to touch on? Granted, this is all subject to the terms of your offer that gets put on the table when you go to sell, and a lot of these components can be negotiated. If you meet a buyer who really wants to make a low offer, if you're doing an open listing and don't have a seller's agent involved, all of this can shift and definitely can be negotiated before you sign your option to purchase agreement and move forward with the sale. For today, however, I think that's plenty to talk about regarding selling your property. Again, please feel free to send me any comments or questions. You can reach me at matt@cbtamarindo.com. To go back over what we covered today in discussing selling your property in Costa Rica, first we went over some tips how to prepare your home or condo without spending a fortune so that it's welcoming to buyers. We went over some really easy, low cost things that you can do, from painting to pressure washing. Next, we discussed some of the difficulties of appraising its value in the real estate market here in Costa Rica. We gave a quick list of the legal documents you'll need to be prepared to sell your property when the time comes. And finally, we went over exclusive versus open listings and the cost of selling your property. My name is Matt Rosensteel. Again, I work with Coldwell Banker Tamarindo Realty. Feel free to stop by the Coldwell Banker office in Tamarindo on Fridays in Plaza Conchal. Be more than happy to discuss this or any of my other videos with you. If you're interested in selling your property, I'm more than happy to be of any service that I can. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Send me any questions. Have a great day, and pura vida.